Welcome everybody back to Veil of Sound. It's the not really end of June when we record this, but it's closing into the end of June. It's hot in Germany, and I've said that in another interview a few days ago. For you guys who see this a few weeks ago, this summer is hot, not only because of hot temperatures outside, but we get tracks from bands which seem to try to melt away the tarmac, not in a blistering explosion, but over hours and hours. You know, we have new music by Mismore, we have Canade, we have the guys that I have here, we'll come to that in a moment. We have a German band called Eremit who took the title for longest record of the year with 2 hours and 13 minutes. And we have those two guys here. We have Jesse and Dylan from Bellwitch. So thanks for being on the show, guys.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks for doing this with us. First question that I always ask, band merch of the day. What are you guys wearing?
Obliterations.
Ooh.
Dead Congregation.
Seems as if my Ashenspire shirt might be the most poppy one amongst. Where are we catching you guys right now? Jesse, you've already said where you are, but for everybody, where are you located at the moment?
Yeah, I'm currently in Tacoma, Washington.
Mm-hmm. And Dylan?
I'm in Olympia, Washington.
So just for our notion, how far is that away from each other?
40 minutes driving fast.
And Dylan, it seems as if you
2 hours of traffic.
Okay. And it seems as if you are either in your private library or in a public library. There seem to be many books.
Oh yes. This is my little office.
That looks good.
So a private library, I guess we could say.
We always start to hit it off with like an icebreaker question, and I thought of something connected to your band name. Which of the two alternative books would you rather read at the moment? And I'm pretty sure that you have read one or maybe even both of them. The Crucible or The House of Seven Gables?
Crucible is what, Arthur Miller?
Yeah, and House of Seven Gables is Hawthorne.
Who is House of Seven Gables?
Nathaniel Hawthorne.
Oh, right. Honestly, I've never read anything by Nathaniel Hawthorne. I've got a copy of The Scarlet Letter, but I haven't read it. I know him and Herman Melville were supposedly famous buddies. I like Herman Melville a lot. But Nathaniel Hawthorne's like the grandson of one of the Salem witch trial judges to some effect.
Exactly. He is, and he also said that was one of the reasons why he wrote several things about the time. I mean, like the Scarlet Letter, also similar time, and House of Seven Gables, also that is about the witch trials itself. But is that something that you guys, not necessarily those two books, but is that something that you guys take inspiration from? Like, you know, the occult?
Maybe to some effect. I can't speak for Jesse, but I think that I'm totally ignorant to the Nathaniel Hawthorne angle of it. Well, beyond what I just said. And I'd say that, like, when people talk about the occult, a lot of times, or especially in the heavy metal scene, it seems to be like there's a very pop angle to the occult, and seems to me like that kind of defeats the purpose of it.
That's true. Jesse,
oxymoronical, if you will.
Yeah,
and just I guess I'm kind of curious about the reason why you're comparing the Salem witch trials to the band.
Just because of the witch.
The Bell Witch is a ghost story.
Yeah.
From the South. So, and there's, I think the closest you and I've ever come, maybe in a band oriented, which was the 7 Hermetic Principles. That's occult. The Golden Bough can be considered occult, but it almost predates it in a lot of ways. So, I think that I don't think that that's necessarily something that we directly pull from. I tend to try to look into older stuff than that. I guess there's obviously a time span to the occult, but at least the way that I think about the occult, and again, sort of the way Dylan put it, and the way it's been used in heavy metal stuff, a lot of it is very common era, if that makes any sense.
It makes.
And that stuff is interesting to me, but not the most interesting, maybe.
What strikes me about metal and its love for the occult is that very often people take the Gothic elements, we want to have some rituals and, we like to scare people. But a lot of times I have a feeling that people forget how gruesome some of that stuff and some of those periods in time really were. Just like, I don't know, like Dylan said, it's a very poppy approach to it, right?
And I guess I've never quite understood what people mean when they say the occult. Would we say that Nathaniel Hawthorne is occult because it's about witch trials, or would we be saying Jung, C.G. Jung is occult because he's dealing with the subconscious mind and dream world, which seems to me that's what, I don't know. When I hear occult, I think we're talking about something that would do with a different reality, or with the human mind going to a different, maybe a different realm that isn't conscious, tangible reality. So I see heavy metal bands talking about the occult a lot. I guess I never quite know exactly what they mean, and it seems like a generic term that gets thrown out
nowadays. Yeah, definitely,
easily. And I mean, I guess at the end of the day, that's fine. I don't think that anyone should. I don't have a bone to pick with people doing that. I never quite know what it means. It's such a broad term in general. Also,
it is. It's like a lot of those musical genres, which are simply undefinable, right?
Sure.
When you're talking about the occult, are you referring to H.P. Lovecraft kind of shit and
you mean me or Dylan?
You. When you ask the question, because I guess I'm kind of riding on what Dylan's saying. It's are the Freemasons a cult? That's what I think of when people say a cult. Is
they're a cult, but are they occult?
I think they're occult and occult, because they're a subsect that's diverting from the mainstream. They've got their own little rituals and handshakes and stuff. And but then also arguably maybe that's where some of the hokey shit comes from too, is because we're talking about secret handshakes, but then some of it's really interesting and the history of it, maybe. So what did you mean by the occult when you asked the question?
I think that is also one of those things that is connected to it, when you look at heavy metal and the use of it, people seem to not be able to define it. When I would be asked how I would define the occult, then I would say you have to look at it from different angles. First of all, it is something that is really occult, like a cult, which is some kind of secret society thing. And it doesn't even have to be something as well known as the Freemasons. And I'm not going into Dan Brown shit here, not that. But the occult is basically very often a cult. That is one thing for it. The other is, of course, the ritualistic thing. How do you achieve a higher consciousness or a different consciousness, a different perception? And the third thing to me is occult literature, which is very often connected to the other two as well, of course. But I think there has been a huge development over the last couple of decades, maybe nearly like 2 centuries, where the occult has come back into consciousness a little bit more, whereas in the let's say 18th century, reason was the thing to strive for, real explanations. And of course, it's also something that, everybody perceives it a little differently. And I think, for me, and that was the connection to your band, was like is there an interest in occult literature? Yeah, that would be my definition.
I follow what you mean. And I think that like, I like Jesse and we've never sat around and had a discussion about like, quote, the occult.
Yeah.
But I think that as you're talking about it, I'm like, I understand maybe in these terms why heavy metal would be so accustomed to having the word occult attached to it, because all these things are very occult. Maybe this is simple, but it's just something, I don't know. We never talk about it.
I think we talk more about like philosophy and other types of literature than occult literature.
So
sure.
Is there?
And I think a lot of that could probably fall into the terms of occult, maybe based off of how you're saying
it. Yeah. But is there literature that you both are interested in? Is there literature that you both are interested in that you say, like, maybe also philosophy, that is like an influence on you personally or on the band?
Lately, we've been talking a lot about Arthur Schopenhauer and Friedrich Nietzsche, which I think could both, based on how we just kind of defined occult, I think we could probably tie both of those two into the occult, probably in a large way. Like if we're talking about like rituals and whatnot, in the way that like heavy metal, there's a show across the world when a heavy metal show happens, it's generally within the same time frame. It's kind of cross-cultural in so many ways, but also confined to like certain areas of the world. So maybe not quite as global as some things are, but the shows are usually the same way. A band plays, there's a mosh pit sometimes, there's you kind of ideally one could kind of leave their earthly consciousness for a time and kind of have that out of body experience in the best case scenarios, or if there's plenty of acid or mushrooms at the show. And I think that that ties in a lot with the Nietzsche stuff, with like the Dionysian sort of festivals or rituals, or in kind of like the overindulgence and sort of purging of whatever it is that gets purged in a ritual. If you're trying to get out things that have been repressed. Of course, those authors are both German, so there's I think that there's a theme of that in a lot of German literature as well, I think.
In that time frame, definitely, but one also has to see that Schopenhauer and Nietzsche, or Nietzsche as in German, they are more well regarded outside of Germany, because
interesting.
Because a lot of Germans associate, for example, Nietzsche with one of his very programmatic, over the top sentences, where he's in one of his writings, he basically, if you would have put it in easy words, where he says like, well, if you go to your wife, don't forget the whip.
Oh,
where people don't look at a grander scheme of things. Of course, that sentence is shit, clear, but people tend to forget whatever things the guys wrote. So I know that both of them are more well respected outside of Germany.
Well, I think that even like across the board, though, a lot of the existentialists from anywhere, regardless, were actually considered occultists by larger society. So that actually does cross over, because that was a way for the larger society to deem what they were saying as problematic, and therefore should not be accepted mostly by the church. Because like every one of them, even David Hume or whoever, if any sort of ontological or epistemological theory that would discount, those virtues that everyone loves so much in the church, they would be deemed occultists and then ostracized. So I think that is another way that you could talk about the occult, which is it's actually just another in-group, out-group dynamic that really doesn't necessarily mean anything.
Yeah.
And it's determined by the time.
Yeah.
David Hume was the Scottish guy, is that right?
Yeah.
And he's sort of like he and some other people were on the verge of solipsism, depending on how you would look at like the way that how do you know what's happening outside of yourself?
Yeah.
Or so there's all these different versions of completely divergent thought processes on what's actually happening outside of your body or mind even, and that at the time by the church or whoever the power that be would deem that person or that thought process part of the occult. And that's kind of like if we're going to make a big old loop, you go back to the Salem witch trials and all the witch trials at large. At the end of the day, what they were doing was just something that was outside of the norm of the time. And then they were being persecuted because of it. And then they were named occultists. So what's interesting is that from within the occult paradigm, it's normal. But if you go outside of it and you start putting it against Western society specifically, because they're the punitive folk at large, at least in the occult. I mean, it happens in Africa, it happens everywhere. But specifically what we're talking about, it's like, I do believe that, the occult, that's maybe one of the reasons why it's so hard to define the occult, is because it's based on the cultural norms of the time.
And it's also just a label to put onto outsiders. I mean, like one of the last crusades that ever happened in Europe was not a crusade against havens or against Muslims. It was against Christians when they persecuted other Christians in the south of France just because they didn't fit the norm of the Catholic Church. But Jesse, you used a very interesting term.
It was Catholics persecuting other Christians, you mean?
No, I'm talking about Christians against Christians, because that was a time in the... Folks, please don't take me as like the source for it, but it's either the 12th or the 13th century when we didn't have a confessional gap between Catholics and Protestants. So that's why I say Christians against Christians. And that was basically one of the last crusades. And it's one in Europe, Christians against Christians. But Jesse, you used a very interesting term. You were talking about the inside group, the outside group. It's interesting to look at your band from that dichotomy. If I play Bell Witch to my wife, she says, oh my goodness, I'm sure nobody listens to that, because it's not her realm. And then I remember it was the Monday before Roadburn, guys, or the Tuesday before Roadburn. We all had set our schedule. And all of a sudden, we get a notification. One of the defining bands is playing at Roadburn. And we're all like, fuck, throw away your schedule. So from a mainstream perspective, you're outsiders. But from certain circles, you're one of the most important bands. And I'm very sure if I say that, you both say, oh, no, we're not. But how did it feel when you came to Roadburn, played your set, and the 013 was full?
It was humbling for sure. It was I remember, this will probably summarize my feelings on it. We were like sound checking, and then they were like, okay, you have to stop because someone else is sound checking in the room right next door and they're an acoustic band and you guys are too loud. Or no, someone is performing next door and you guys are too fucking loud. So basically, you have to wait. And we were like, damn it, we didn't have the monitor mix set up. We have more sound checking we need to do. So they gave us like you can do a quick monitor line check, like right before you play. You have like 5 minutes. And then we're going to pull the curtains. So they had the curtains pulled. We were like, okay, we'll be quick. We did it, got to the point where I was like, okay, I guess that's good enough. And they pulled the curtains, and there was a lot of fucking people in that room. And I remember I kind of looked up and I was like, oh, fuck me. And I don't know if the mic was on when that happened, but I got a little worried that maybe the mic was on when that happened. And I think that summarizes what that felt like.
Jesse,
Yeah,
for me at least.
Did you have similar
yeah,
feelings?
it was really I think, yes. But I think, it was the first time we'd ever played any of it, so I think that it was really an interesting experiment to do that in front of essentially one of the biggest crowds we've ever played in front of. And it was definitely, there's a learning curve to all that. So it's like, that was our first time. And we had worked really, really hard for it to get to that point where we could even play the whole thing. And I know for me personally, it was like super cathartic. I had been going through a lot of personal stuff up until that point, and it was sort of this big benchmark moment, not only because it's our new record and we're playing in front of this giant crowd, but for me personally, it was like a really big deal, and sort of a starting point. And I think that it was, I don't know, it was really humbling and really emotional and really, I'm super appreciative to anyone that stuck it out and was there the whole time. It was really, really, I think, a big deal for us. And now, we've been joking since then. It's like everything kind of feels easy now because that was so scary. So
we played another festival like last month, and they were like, okay, you have a 30-minute time slot. And that was our first set after Roadburn, and we were like, 30 minutes, like how do we do that? We were trying to find the right section to do it, and we found one, and it was fine, but it was like, this is a breeze, no problem.
I wonder if the
cool.
people who booked you for that second festival knew whom they were booking. I mean, like Dylan, I remember you and I
they
were.
did. I think they did.
Yeah, you think they did?
Sorry, go ahead.
I remember
they
you
did.
and I.
They were
you and I talking
of ours.
about
I think
it.
they just had so many other bands. They were
They
were just trying to squeeze everything in, I think, and they didn't have a lot of wiggle room, which is a good problem for them.
Yeah, I still remember, you and me standing outside BO 13 before, but it was like the day or 2 days before your set, and joking, like, okay, do you do an encore or not? And if so, which one? But
right.
It's interesting, Future's Shadow, the new record. First of all, it's amazing. There is no doubt about that. It's a really, really, really good record. And what struck me was the question. I mean, like we all know, this is the first part of a trilogy. I'm not going to ask where you are, at writing or, getting the next things together. But, how far ahead have you planned when you started to write and record the trilogy in itself? Did you already have a certain set, like, okay, the first part must be this, like Clandestine Gate, second one will be that, blah, blah. Or is it like it comes along with a flow, so to speak?
So our original plan was just to write one record at a time, record it, tour it, and then we'd have an idea that would kind of sprout out of that, and it was going to be sort of a cumulative linear line that it kind of went in. When the pandemic hit, we had, as everyone did, plenty of time to sit around and work on things, so we kind of changed the approach. And there was a moment there when we were considering going in and recording the entire 3 albums at the same time. I'm glad we didn't do that, because I think we would have sacrificed a lot. That would have ended up being quantity over quality, I think. But as it is, we've got the next 2 records mapped out. We have a lot of demos of how that is going to all play out. Those will change. Those will be modified. They'll expand and grow in themselves. But I'm really happy with the way that we did it, because I think that it gave a scope for the greater concept to kind of play out of the cycle of the loop, the circle, the hoop, however it should be said. So that this first album is essentially just like one big build. It's kind of building into the next one, and the next one will be there'll still be plenty of builds, but conceptually it'll be a little bit more of a high point, and then the last one will kind of be a slowing down of things, an autumn or a into winter or a sunset sort of thing. And I think that we would have missed some of those subtle details had we recorded one album, then written the next one in response to that one, then written the next one in response to that. So I'm pretty happy with the way that it ended up being. The pandemic kind of gave us opportunities to expand on the initial idea, which is, I could do without another pandemic, but I'm kind of thankful for that little aspect of it.
So can you maybe explain the concept behind Clandestine Gate? Let's stick to that one, of course. Can you explain the background story a little bit?
Sure. So
for all those who are listening and who love the music but who might not have had the time yet to sit down and really look at the grander scheme of things.
Sure. So it'll be the first of 3, with the idea that the 3 are kind of one big loop, or a song or a piece that could be played on repeat, and it would kind of just circle back around into itself, much in the way that a day goes. The sun goes up, comes down. Maybe in the way that maybe like the way human life seems to go. Like someone's born, maybe they have children, they die, the children have children. There's kind of just this repeating loop. To go back to Schopenhauer, what he said, the death of the individual, no, sleep to the individual is like death to the species. I think that was his thing. I think kind of playing on that same concept, that kind of being like, from our angle, we'd be like being stuck in a cycle, so to say, like maybe unable to get out of the cycle. So the Clandestine Gate would be the beginning of a cycle, is a weird way to put it. But if we were to try to conceptualize a cycle, and the way we're doing it is we're kind of making it as in like a beginning, and there's like a dawn. This record would be kind of like the dawn, or going through a gate, so to say, that sort of, clandestine in that where does the dawn actually come from? You can point at the sun when it comes up, but the whole sky is already lit to some effect. There's already blue everywhere. There's orange everywhere, whatever the atmospheric conditions allow for color-wise. Likewise with spring, like when does spring come? Like we know what time of year it does, but it's sort of just sneaks in at its own little pace. Likewise with I think you can make that analogy for any sort of cycle one would find in life.
Yeah, I think another interesting thing that I'm kind of just curious, once we're done with the whole thing, is that as of now, this was the first, obviously, therefore it's the beginning. And like another way to think about something is there's like beginnings, transitions, and endings, but an ending can also be a beginning. And so I think that what's interesting to me, and this is just like total experiment, because I don't know, neither of us have ever done this shit before either, but it's like I'm curious to see once it's all done where it's going to feel like it starts. And I'm not really sure that that's going to be the beginning of Clandestine Gate. Just at least the way that I'm conceptualizing the whole thing. I don't really know if that's going to be the beginning necessarily. And I think that's going to be one of the really cool aspects of it. And I think one of the cool aspects of long form pieces in general is, rather than that sort of apex moment or many apex moments being like shoved down one's throat and being overly obvious and labeled, I think that like things are when they're more concise, you know, it's very clear and rigid essentially when the beginnings, middles, and ends are happening. But I think with this one, if it does successfully loop as it's envisioned, it's going to be absolutely subjective, I believe, to where people are going to find those apex moments and where they're going to get bored and where they're going to be like enthralled, or like, you know, all of those things are going to be really, really organic when it comes to fruition. And I think that I don't even know as a person involved in writing it and playing it where that point's going to be until it's actually going to be able to be listened to in that way, which I think is kind of fun.
And even at that point, when you have if you achieve a loop, which would be awesome, but if you achieve that loop, then you two are also very surely aware that if there is a loop, then people will start defining or finding their own beginning inside the loop, which might not be the beginning of Clandestine Gate. It could be somewhere in the middle of Clandestine Gate. It could also be at the end of the last one, which then again is like so close to what you said, you know, like the individual aspect of the audience. That is something that is very interesting in that idea. But one of you, I think it was again Jesse, who said, like, you know, creating the thing. Like a technical question. Is it just my imagination? The last time I saw you guys was in 2018 when you did Bell Witch, when you did the Mirror Reaper completely at Roadburn. But Jesse, is it just my imagination, or do you now have a new rig for your whole drum set?
The rig has been exponentially expanded. It's very involved. There's a lot going on now. So during the Mirror Reaper tour, that was the beginning of us introducing basically organ, you know, into the sound of the band, and it was much more minimal. So at that time, so honestly, on the Mirror Reaper tour, I had a single foot pedal does a single octave, and an organ module. Then when we started messing around with Stygian Bow, I
shout out to Eric.
Shout out to Eric. You know, once I got comfortable with the single foot pedal, you know, I was like, I wonder if there's a way for me to add another foot pedal so I can do, you know, lead and rhythm at the same time.
Wow.
And so that's what I started, basically like two hands instead of one hand. Or more accurately, it's almost like two fingers on each hand, basically. It's not full hands, but with my feet. And so I added the second pedal. We started, you know, stuff that we had added. The goal is always to basically be able to recreate what we're doing in the studio, and pretty rigidly, like not using loops, not using backing tracks. There's no click tempo involved. So it's all live. And so with Stygian Bow, there was a bit more of a presence of piano, and we added some synthesizers. And so we were like, you know, I was trying to figure out how I could add that to the setup, and I figured it out. And then now with Clandestine Gate, we added a shit ton of synthesizers and Mellotron and other fun stuff in the studio, which became quite a process of trying to figure out how to do that. But now at the moment, the setup has two isolated organ modules, one for each foot, and then two synthesizers per each foot as well. So there's a total of 6 instruments being played between the 2 feet.
How do you manage it on stage? How often do you have to rehearse that?
It's a work in progress. I think the part I need to rehearse most is the setup and tear down.
And
the playing is becoming easier and easier. The setup and tear down is not becoming that much easier. Let's put it that way.
Are you still adding stuff? Or is now a point where you feel like more will become impossible?
I'm currently messing around with this fun little guy. I'm trying to figure out how to make it easier to fly around with this stuff, but I've got this little fun dude that hopefully we're gonna put in the mix to maybe donate less money to the airlines. But yeah, it's sort of what's interesting. I mean, I think that, like, you know, one thing that he and I always talk about is like it has to be tasteful. And it can't be too much. It can't be too proggy. So it's like there's sort of things could just consistently be added. We could keep adding forever, but I think there is a point when, you know, it becomes maybe just like, you know, too much. I don't know. We haven't hit it yet. We'll find out.
Yeah, I think we want to make sure that it's appropriate. Like, I feel like every time we're adding something, be it whatever the instrument is, really, but like obviously the keys are a key talking point there. But yeah, whenever we add something, it's like, is that too much? And we cut a lot of music out of a song, even when it's like that riff is just a little too much. It doesn't fit. I don't know. I think that I've been in a lot of bands that would try to expand things, and what gets expanded on is too much, and it kind of fucks up maybe the greater picture of what the song or the piece is doing. And I think that we're trying to make sure whenever we're composing a song, we're spending a lot of time trying to make sure everything fits in its right place, and it has its own, like, the statement that the instrument, whatever the instrument is making, is connected with what everything else is doing, and it all has its own sort of biosphere, and it has its own sort of environment that it all lives in together, and it's all symbiotic and works together and makes the other parts better.
Dylan, has anything changed about your setup or about your instrument?
My pedal board got a little bit smaller recently. That's just because I compacted it more, and I was using an old Moger Foger pedal, which was, you know, the size of 4 smaller pedals, and I flipped that out for 1 smaller pedal. So all of a sudden I had a little extra real estate to work with. But my setup hasn't changed a lot. I guess one thing that I've been doing differently is compared to Mirror Reaper, in playing the bass, I'll be doing like I'll hold the rhythm with the left hand, and I'll usually do a root note and an octave, sometimes a root note and a fifth, and with my right hand I'll tap a melody. Mirror Reaper and Forward, that was always done. I would do 1 note at a time with the tap hand. On the Clandestine Gate, I'm trying to incorporate more chords as much as possible, which I'm finding that gets a little complicated with the pickups on a bass can only really handle so much. When I'm trying to hit 4 notes at a time, the pickups don't necessarily want to do that. And sometimes the upper register notes, which are generally the brighter, prominent notes, that will overpower the lower notes. This is really nerdy. Sometimes the high notes get overly compressed and muddy, and everything kind of gets it'll cut the sound off. Even if the string, if I can feel it sustaining on the neck, the way that it all translates through pickups just kind of it just kind of flattens itself out. So what I'm trying to do is figure out how to play so as not to flatten it out. So as to kind of like, what order do if I'm trying to hit one big note, the idea would be to hit all 4 strings at the same time. It's a little hairy because it has to be a little off. Like it has to be low notes, and then the 2 upper notes have to be kind of slid into or slid out of, which is it's kind of hard to hit 4 notes at the same time in the first place. But then sliding in or sliding off of that is I don't know. Yeah, this might be more than what you asked for.
It's a flam.
It's totally fine.
It's a string flam.
And that I'm having a hard time with that as of late. So
I do think that like this record, we really like the playing. We added a lot, and it's like it's been stepped up, significantly, and that was something that we really consciously were trying to do from Mirror Reaper. And just sort of like really like kind of give it a nudge. And now it's going to be fun to tour on it and get tight, because we've only played now 3 times with the new material. And I think it's going to be, about a week into that tour, it's going to be nice and solid, hopefully.
Even from like the first show to, sorry, go ahead.
No, you go ahead, Dylan. Even for the first show?
I think that like the 2 following performances have felt, I mean, like we discussed earlier, a little bit easier because that first show was so massive, playing the entire thing. But I think that some of the pressure of that has allowed us moving forward. Like I feel like I'm feeling really confident. Like the show we just played last weekend, it was like that felt really good, and that's only 3 shows in, and they weren't consecutive. Like a tour would be. So yeah, as Jesse just said, I think that a couple of days into the tour, we're probably both going to feel really tight, and he's going to be tearing his gear down so fast.
God.
I have only like a few more questions before we hit the infamous quickfire round at the end of every Veil of Sound interview, but very quick one. Can you imagine playing Future's Shadow ever live in its entirety?
Oh no.
I can.
Yeah.
Oh no. Oh no, look at the time. Gotta go. Just kidding.
Oh, we're only in the middle of part 2. See you next week, buddy.
I mean, crazier things have happened in this wild world filled with occult experiences and whatnot.
I know that you guys have been working a lot on that record and mapping out the trilogy and all of that. But we have to make one thing clear. It took Bellwitch 6 years to publish the follow-up record to Mirror Reaper. Dylan, I know you started another round of studying. What was it? Literature, right?
Creative writing.
Sorry. So how else did you guys keep yourself busy over those 6 years?
We did the Stygian Bow record came out in 2020.
That is a very good one.
Which was a lot of work, and in a lot of ways that's kind of an alter ego of Bellwitch. And I guess at the end of the day, I feel like that is the follow-up to Mirror Reaper. It's different. It's not necessarily, it's not Bellwitch.
It's also not Aerial Rune.
Yeah, it's definitely its own thing. But I think we were digging really hard into what both bands do and trying to figure out how those go together. And granted, as we continue to put out Stygian Bow records, which that's kind of next on the plate, I think that that's going to grow a lot. And I think that, every band that I've started in my life has kind of been a little rough at the beginning. And I think that we skipped a lot of steps with the way that we did Stygian Bow. Like we the three of us had all worked together a lot before. It was kind of just incorporating these new elements in a grander scale. Like, there's a guitar involved. There's like a lead singer of sorts. There's you know, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, I think that was a lot, and I think the pandemic was a lot also. Like, we were scheduled to record the Clandestine Gate in at like March 27th of 2020, which would have been a week after everything started shutting down in the US. So, you know, we were scheduled to go in, then and the guy that owns our practice space sent like a mass email out, and he was like, "Hey everyone, if you want to get your shit out of this big practice space, get it tomorrow, or, you know, maybe in a year if we're all still alive." So we had to reassess real quick, and we're like, well, if we can't practice before going in to record, we should probably cancel recording. And the studio was like, yeah, everyone else just canceled too. And I mean, everything was, no one knew what was going on. So it was like, it was the right move at the time. But I think that had the pandemic not happened, that would have been recorded 3 years earlier, or 2 years earlier. However,
and we were also, you know, basically on the road with Mirror Reaper the
right
whole
up until
time.
that point.
Yeah, like, I think that was a lot. You know, we kept getting offered tours that we absolutely could never say. They were like dream tours, you know, and we were just doing them. And then we did the whole thing, you know, the tour in Europe where we were playing the whole thing. And yeah, so hopefully, you know, and there's something to be said about taking one's time, you know, like these aren't small records. If we were, you know, I think if we were recording half-hour, you know, blasters, it would be different.
Yeah. But Jesse, did I understand it correctly that you also have another band right now, apart from Stygian Bow, apart from Bellwitch, another one that you release stuff with?
Yeah, we both do. Yeah, we have a number of other projects.
So now's the time to drop them.
Yeah, I think, are you referring to Autophagy?
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's a band that actually, it had been around since 2017. I joined during the pandemic. So like they just asked me to record drums for them. Mm-hmm. Did that. Yeah, now we have a pretty sick European tour coming up in September with a band called Sedimentum from Montreal. I'm doing vocals in that band also, so I'm the main vocalist and doing death metal drums, which I've never done before, which is pretty fun.
It sounds cool. Another level of exhausting.
It's exhausting. Yeah, it's exhausting. That's another thing I need to work on, is being less exhausted.
And Dylan, I think I read your name in the credits of another record recently, and correct me if I'm wrong. Where were you involved with this last year or this year?
Which record are you referring to?
Was it something with Sun or something like that? Or I think I saw your name somewhere.
The James Romig and Mike Scheidt collaboration, the That's Complexity of Distance. Yeah. I wrote the not the liner notes, but like the blurb on the inside of the record, kind of discussing, maybe just kind of summarizing what was going on. Yeah, that was cool. James approached me and asked me to do that, and it was great.
It's also a very interesting record.
Yeah, it's a really awesome record. Like I listened to it a lot, and it's yeah. I mean, I could go on and on about that. Maybe a different interview.
We also did an interview with James last year, and it was like very, very interesting. So every Veil of Sound interview ends with the quick fire round. You guys will get 6 quick questions. It's like What do you like more, roses or tulips, Seattle or San Francisco? You know what? And you simply have to pick. Let's start with something more easy, I hope. As you come from the Seattle area, Melvin's versus Soundgarden.
Right now in this moment, or like?
Yeah.
I mean, Melvin's.
Yes.
I'll go Melvin's too. I'll go Melvin's. If you asked middle school Jesse, it'd be Soundgarden till death.
I just heard that they proclaim that they're going to release a Throbbing Gristle album, which will be interesting.
Awesome.
Whoa.
Ornate.
Wait, the Melvins or Soundgarden?
The Melvins. The Melvins supposedly are doing an all-electro Throbbing Gristle.
That's
tribute
awesome.
album.
Whoa. Sick.
But I mean, like, we're talking about King Buzzo and Dale, you know, it's not for sure until it's released, right?
Sure.
Talking about concept albums, Pink Floyd versus Yes.
Pink Floyd.
I'm personally Pink Floyd, yeah. No slight to Yes. Yes is great, but I'm into the Pink Floyd.
I'll now give you one band and 2 records, and you have to choose between those 2 records. Sun, would you rather listen to Monoliths and Dimensions or Altar?
Altar.
Okay.
No slight to Monoliths and Dimensions. That's a great record.
Yeah, it is. It is. The same concept, Boris. Which one would you rather listen to? Absolute Ego or No?
Absolute Ego.
I agree. Which one? Yeah, I agree. Yeah, absolutely.
Absolute Ego is the very first one.
Can I say Altar again?
You can say whatever you want to. It's your choices. Now 2 bands. ISIS versus Neurosis.
Neurosis.
Yeah, no slight to ISIS, but I'd go with Neurosis. Yeah.
And the last one, also something I guess that you will be familiar with both. And I also want to end on a not metal note. Ornette Coleman versus John Coltrane.
I'm not familiar with Ornette Coleman.
So then you have to choose Coltrane.
My answer is easy.
That was an easy one. So guys, thanks for your time. Thanks for the record. No thanks for the surprise, because it totally kicked my schedule. So next time you do something like that, at least give me a hint a week before. I will also keep it quiet. And for everybody who is listening to this right now or watching us in whichever situation you are, if you like us, give us a comment or drop us a comment on any of our socials on Instagram or on Facebook. Subscribe to our channels. If you want to support us a little bit more, go to our Patreon. You can find all the information on our website. And now for you 2 guys, your chance for final last words.
I guess I appreciate the talk about the occult that we had, because I think that whenever I see the word occult, I kind of just, look over it really quick. So I'm like, oh, that's kind of a buzzword. I'm not going to base my opinion off of, something like that. But I like the way that's kind of, that we just all collectively applied that to sort of the counterculture, the broad counterculture of what heavy metal does in in the largest way. And I like that. And I don't know, I can't quit thinking about the things we started discussing. We could talk about that sort of thing for days, I think, but I appreciate that conversation.
So if you want to do another round of that, I'm always open to that.
The occult version.
The occult version. But please, without shedding blood and without Any candles
come
in the
on.
background. Jesse, you're last to go.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks for
It's
taking
been a
your
pleasure. Maybe we'll see you in Germany. And I guess I'm really excited. Oh, what's that?
You go ahead.
Oh, yeah. I'm excited to we leave in like 6 weeks. And I'm stoked to start playing this stuff out in Europe. And then after that, out here. It's gonna be awesome.
So I wish you nothing but the best for the tour. And of course, everybody, if you haven't taken those 85 minutes of time yet, listen to Future's Shadow Part 1, Clandestine Gate. Both of you, thanks for your time and enjoy the rest of your day.